All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar hosted by the Informs Military and Security Society. I'm Sean Doheny. I'm the industry at large representative to the Mass Council, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. I'm looking forward to this great discussion about why won't they use my model from Walt DeGrange from CANA Advisors. I'll introduce him a little more thoroughly in just a little bit. We also have several participants joining our discussion panel after Walt's discussion today to share their experiences and answer any questions you might have as well. So thank you, Shannon Dietrich and Dan Wozniak for joining us today. Before we get started, I'm going to cover just a few admin notes. And first, as I mentioned, this webinar is going to be recorded and available on our YouTube page, and I'll send out the link shortly after the webinar. Now, I know as I'm sharing my screen, you probably can't see my Zoom controls, so I'll just walk you through just a little bit of it here. So first, everyone should have a green bar here, and as you hover up to that bar, you should get a drop-down menu that'll show you different things. And usually under more, it depends on if you're on a Mac or a PC, you'll have more, and your audio settings and controls will be there, or under the your mute, the little microphone icon, or the video icon. So right now, if you would like to join the conversation, we have a pretty a great group today. It looks like we've got about 25 participants today, so great showing. And if you'd like to join in the discussion, there is a raise your hand feature here. And so, sorry, first, you can make sure that your speaker is on the right one. I know sometimes flipping through different Zoom and WebEx and all the other different software that's out there, sometimes it'll jump around from where your microphone or speakers are connected. So make sure you look at that. There's the raise hand feature. Just click on that if you want to come off. I'll help you come off mute so that you can join the conversation. And everyone here, as you've been joining, we've been asking you to put in chat where you're from. So I think everybody sees the Q&A and the chat features here. We'll go ahead and just use chat or Q&A. Doesn't matter. But if you have a question, please, we want to keep this as interactive as possible. So feel free to join in the conversation there. Want to encourage everyone here to connect with us on these handles on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. If you enjoyed today's webinar, please let us know. If you have suggestions for future webinars, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you and connect with you so that we can continue to give back to the larger military and national security, operations research, and management sciences communities. So as I mentioned, the session is being recorded, and we'll post the recording on our YouTube page shortly after the webinar, so you can go back to it if you missed something, or you can share it, and we hope you will with others if you find it helpful. And knowing Walt, this is going to be fun. We plan to post that right after, also on our Informs Connect page if you're an Informs member, and if you're not, I would highly encourage you to consider becoming one. So. With that, I see that our president of the society has joined us. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Natalie Scala. Dr. Scala is the president of the Military and Security Society and an associate professor and graduate program director at Townsend University in the Business Analytics and Technology Management Department. I'll turn the reins over to her to say a few words about our society, and then I'll introduce our speaker. So with that, over to you, Dr. Scala.
Hi. All right. So as Sean gave me the quick introduction, I am Dr. Natalie Scala. I'm the current president of MASS. This is my second year of a 2-year term. So Brian Lunday will be taking over with the position in January of 2021. But I'm thrilled that everyone is here today, and thank you for joining. These are quarterly webinars that we are doing to help increase mentorship as well as the mass community as well. It's a little hard for us sometimes to be connected virtually, especially with everything going on, all the uncertainties in the world and the different stresses. So I'm hoping that if you are on the East Coast or even Central Time, you're having a quick lunch and a time to chat. And then if you're out on the West Coast or even internationally, you're grabbing a few minutes. Or if you find us online later, hopefully this is a positive session for you, a way to relax and grow your network and grow in a little bit of knowledge without too many distractions. So Mass is a community specifically, or not specifically, but mostly planned for, mostly geared for those working in military and security spaces. And those are both nationally within the US and internationally as well. We look for development, dissemination, and implementation of knowledge, applied research, science, and technologies. So we welcome those working in academia. We welcome those working as practitioners, maybe in government spaces or in research spaces, and those with current military and prior military backgrounds. Graduate students are also very much welcome into this society, and undergraduates as well, so you can get an understanding of this problem space and ways you might be able to participate into it. So the Informs annual meeting will be virtual this year, but we still have a ton of great Mass sessions planned in the conference. We're getting all of that scheduled. We will post that on our social media when we have a full schedule. And we are hoping that you'll be able to join us for an annual meeting as well, or maybe even consider presenting an annual meeting. Okay, next slide. So some of the benefits, like I mentioned, is the network. I have been an Informs member for over 10 years, and my network has grown exponentially as being part of this organization. Every time I connect with Informs, it is a positive experience. I learn something, I meet someone new, and eventually something good comes out of it. So it's great to learn about other researchers and what they're working on and others' approaches to expand your personal toolkit as well, to increase your domain knowledge. And we have a lot of awards within the Mass community, as well as in the general Informs community as well. So it's a great space to earn some recognition from your work, as well as continually to grow as well. Next slide, please. All right, and I'm going to toss it back to Sean to introduce Walt. You'll notice I'm the editor of this book, so I think it's best for Sean to go ahead and introduce Walt today, Walt is a professional friend of mine as well as a personal friend. He's an excellent researcher, great speaker, and I know you're going to have a really dynamic talk coming up in the next couple minutes here.
Thank you, Natalie. And I'll do the introduction of Walt. Speaking of one of the researchers in the military and security spaces and on the society, it's my privilege to introduce Mr. Walt DeGrange. He's the Director of Analytics Capabilities at CANA Advisors. He's a retired Navy Supply Corps officer, 21 years in the military, 3 years of which was as a military assistant professor at the Naval Postgraduate School. He's now an executive advisor at the North Carolina State Supply Chain Resource Cooperative. He's also involved in several professional societies, the Informs, the Military and Security Society, and the Military Operations Research Societies. He is a certified analytics professional, and as Dr. Scala mentioned, as she was one of the key editors of the Handbook of Military Defense Operations Research, Walt was the author of Chapter 12, Why Won't You Use My Model? And that's what we're looking forward to hearing more about today. So with that, Walt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Oh, can you?
Yep, I'm stop sharing now.
Yep, cool. And all right, yeah, thanks everybody. That was for the introduction, and Natalie and Sean, and the opportunity to speak today. So yeah, Sean's already pretty much covered all this, but yeah, this is my background, education. Yeah, went through ROTC at Vanderbilt, and Naval Postgraduate School Operations Research degree. And the background pretty much just like Sean had mentioned, interesting facts. I love two-stepping, sand volleyball, and I spot for several race car teams. None of those things I am currently doing right now due to the COVID-19 issues. So typically summer for me is very jam-packed with travel for on the weekends and during the week and such. So I've enjoyed a very quiet summer sitting in this chair. I have, however, had the opportunity to do many podcasts. As a matter of fact, I did one on race car spotting and analytics, which was pretty cool. The driver that I spot for Spec Miatas is also an analytics professional. So we got to brag about how we use analytics to win races. So yeah, with that, the subject that I'm going to be briefing on today was the topic of the chapter that we did for the book that Natalie and James edited. And I will tell you the first lesson learned about writing books and about when you time their release is make sure that you do not release a book 2 months into a global pandemic. So that's probably lesson learned number one. It was great to have the opportunity to basically write this chapter. And this was work that I did at Naval Postgraduate School. My co-author, Wilson Price, who is professor emeritus and lives up in Canada, we actually had put this in a paper, and this was, there's a paper that's done on this that covers all the math. And we actually had put the, how difficult this was on a human side on how to implement it. The math worked perfectly, and it took about 6 months to pretty much get 95% of the solution, the algorithm and everything working, and then it took 9 years to implement. And so one wonders why it took so long to implement, and what short of a period of time to basically develop the math. And that's where we were going with this chapter. It actually got kicked out of the paper. They thought it was like a lot of not to be named publications felt like the math was strong, but this other piece was irrelevant. So Wilson and I were very thankful that we actually got to tell this story, which I think is very relevant to analytics professionals. It's the piece of how do you get your stuff used, right? So we'll be going over 3 key concepts, 3 keys to success, and then just a brief overview of the actual model. It was the Replenishment at Sea Planner, better known as RASP, for the U.S. Navy. So in general, when you're talking about analytics, there is this piece, and I call this the main equation, right? And a lot of folks will basically focus on the analysis, which is very important. That includes the data and the math. There has been a lot of emphasis here lately on effective communication. There's a lot of things if you go online about, telling stories and data visualization and such. And that too is very important. There's also kind of this human aspect of it, though, that you cannot, disconnect, right? We're all humans. And one of those is experience. So, you could be a Nobel Prize winning mathematician and then, create a model but you may not have any experience in that field. So even though you have, all the accolades behind you, if you don't have any experience in that field, then the convince me factor could be quite high on why that model works or doesn't work, right? And then there's this other human aspect called trust, right? And there is no 2 ways about it. Humans are humans. We, if we just meet somebody, typically your trust level is not going to be as high as if you've worked 10 years or 20 years with that person on many projects, perhaps had personal interactions with them, and, really trust that person, right? You may trust that person with your car, or um, living in your house or whatever, but, that's a very high level of trust, right? So, and the Venn diagram below kind of shows this. We've got the math piece, which again is very important, and we have this emotion piece. And I think that the piece of this that typically gets a little more touchy-feely, and most analytics professionals probably are not that comfortable with, is the emotion piece, right? But when you start talking about people actually using your model, the emotion piece comes into play. And what this equation basically does is the trust plus experience plus effective communication plus analysis has to overcome a convince me factor. And this person that you're trying to convince could be a coworker, a collaborator. It could be an author. It could be your boss. It could be, an admiral, a general, a CEO. Each one of those people are going to have a different level, right, of convince me. Some people will be very mathematically inclined, so you're going to, the convince me factor may be very high. Some of them may not trust math. Math, they hated math, and so then you're maybe depending more on them trusting you personally, right, or your experiential stuff. So, and effective communication. So this is different at every level. So basically, with for those of you who are study change management and task user workflow, basically this is the work triangle. And you've got a system, you have a task that's performed, and you have a user. And analytics is basically making one of these three things easier, right? Typically, we either work on the system or we work on the task. And the thing that we have to always keep in mind is there's an equilibrium between these three. So if you change one, the other two have to change. Or if you change two, the third one has to change, right? So for instance, if you employ, in this case, a decision support tool, and then into the system, and you make the task easier, then the user changes, right? And in this case, this was a model that schedules supply ships to refuel Navy vessels. So for those of you who are familiar with the traveling salesman problem, this is a traveling salesman problem where the cities are moving. So it's rather complex. And what was happening is the users were actually scheduling this manually. So by using charts and some parallel rulers and time distance tables, and they could pop out probably 10 to 20 feasible solutions a day, but they weren't optimal. And in general, the Navy spends about 6 gallons of gas to deliver 1 gallon of gas. So any savings of time distance or speed, is very there's a huge impact. So, and in this case, if we ask the user, like, okay, now the system is going to provide you 10,000 solutions and rank the top 10, and all you have to do is pick one, then that's a big change for the user, right? So again, this equilibrium is critical. The other thing is that the actual change and the perceived change are two different things. So the user, in this case, we thought we were taking workload off the user, but the perception from the user is you're putting me out of a job, right? So that's useful to know whenever you're trying to implement these things. So yeah, the key concept number one is innovation doesn't equal invention. So a lot of times in analytics, we're like, build it and they will come, right? So we're going to build a really nice machine learning model or AI model or optimization, which will validate, saves millions of dollars. And this is a slam dunk. Everybody will want to use it. So within 6 months of this project, we had already validated a $10 million savings, fuel savings for like 2 quarters. And it was incredible because just trying to figure out how to make that test run took an incredible amount of time and brain power. But after we did that, there was still no adoption, right? There was still a long ways to go before users were comfortable using this tool. So the big takeaway here is that innovation equals invention plus adoption. And this is the piece, again, I think a lot of analytics professionals, we love the innovation part. That's where a lot of these, our programs teach, is the math behind it, the data science. And, I love that part too. However, you could have all the world's greatest models, and if nobody ever uses them, then what you have is just a bunch of models that perhaps produced a lot of great papers, but that's it, right? They're not actually affecting anything. In this case, we wanted to save the taxpayers millions of dollars a year in fuel savings, right? And I think all of us online are U.S. taxpayers, so that's pretty important. So this is the adoption state space. So the one thing is that typically in change management or in change projects, you go from left to right. You go from awareness, there could be some defense, pushback, passivity. There's a trial acceptance. And then you may, if you're lucky, you go on and move into adoption, right? Some cases you may move to rejection, discouragement, satisficing, which is actually a word. And so, but the one issue is that these states, it's kind of like a Markov state space, right? I think most people think that you move from the left to the right and that's all there is. So you have this big party after go live and it's adopted, and then everybody's happy, right? Well, the issue is that you can move back and forth. And it's well documented, especially with like hospital record systems, ERP systems, that after adoption, even years down the road, there can be issues that send you back to a spontaneous defense or people not using the system. So that's the one piece, I think, again, that most of the time we kind of, have a finish line and deploy it, do the training, reap some benefits, perhaps apply for some Informs award, and then you kind of call it a day. However, there are many instances where these systems, years down the road, for whatever reason, stop being used. And there could be good reason for that, right? They may not, the math may not apply anymore, or assumptions made no longer apply, or, the context has changed. However, this is definitely something to be aware of, that there is no such thing as a finish line when you're implementing analytics solutions. The key concept too is the context of the use case, between your user and the system is very important. So in our case, we had a system that is on a classified side, right? The schedules of all the ships are classified. You don't want those to be public knowledge. And so the model that we built was we had to put it on the classified system, which for those of you who are familiar with the military is no small deal. So we actually had to go back a version in Excel and VBA and take capability out of the model. And that actually took about 2 to 3 months to do that. So I had to actually explain to an admiral why I was spending money on labor to program something to take capability out of his model, which that's a very uncomfortable conversation to have. However, on that system, only that version before Excel was allowed. So for the schedulers to actually use the system, that's what we had to do. So, and then obviously explaining to people how this process is better, which is different for each person, right? You just can't do a blanket statement. Well, this is going to save the taxpayer thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, and then call it a day. How is this going to make life better for each user? And key concept 3, there's something called action circles. And these are very, very important. You typically have some type of analytics professional here. We call it an OR implementer. you have a customer. The customer has some requirement and offers, that they need solved, right? And then the OR implementer agrees, you deliver, and then the customer accepts. And again, we basically make the case that these circles are never ending, right? So, and it gets a lot more complex, as we'll see a little later on. So, but this is kind of the basic piece of the puzzle that is just not a one and done. So the keys to success, with the context piece, obviously listening to the customer, the who, what, when, where, why, how, and with each customer or with each user, you could have different answers. And again, trying to reconcile all these answers and all of these things. And one of the issues that we had is schedulers in some of the locations are military, in some of the locations they're civilian. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the military tends to rotate. So they're on a 1 or 2 year rotation for each command. And the civilians tend to stay in one place for 3 to 5 years. So there was definitely different requirements for somebody who is rotating quite often as opposed to another person that's in that job for a long period of time, right? And there's also different levels of feeling threatened. So for the military person, this is going to make their job easier. The train up to use it will be much faster. By the way, you're going to get on liberty faster, which, is the time off at the end of the day. That may be a really good selling point. But to the civilian who that's their job, that's in their position description, that person thinks that this entire system was going to take their job, right, and replace them. So it's a totally different aspect and totally different context. And this is the key. The second key to success, like I was talking about before, is these action circles. So if the model was just the implementer and the user, life would be easy, right? But what we have is we have a whole bunch of action circles. So there's not only the implementer, which is the analytics professional, and the user, but the user also has these commitments to their command, their organization, their unit. The implementer, I know I was kind of the lead marketer for this and would go out to the Middle East or to Singapore and get feedback from the users and do on-site training. But I was also dealing with a programmer. We also had a sponsor for this that was providing funding. So, this and all these people had different action circles, so different commitments to different people. And all of these things had to be maintained, right? So this web, this network gets very complex very quickly. And this is the third key to success is typically when this slide builds, I test my drawing ability and just show the middle and then ask what it is. And with the military crowd, almost everybody gets that it's an intermodal container, just because most of us have lived in those things over in the Middle East, which, depending on your air conditioning, could be quite comfortable. So I would say that pretty much everything in everybody's office or house right now, I would say for high probability that everything that you own, at least one of the components of whatever you have was probably in one of these intermodal containers at one point in time, right? Because of the way the supply chain works. And all of us, I think, pretty much take this for granted as far as, you see these 10,000 container ships that are, seemingly just have an infinite amount of containers on them. And it's like, oh, that must have been, we must have always done business like that, right? Well, come to find out, and this is a great book, The Box, is that you will find out that this idea actually was proposed by Malcolm McLean, that actually was in North Carolina, and that it was invented in 1956, and then the ISO standards weren't published until many years later. and in 68 and 70, and now it's prevalent throughout the world. And there were a whole bunch of issues about why everybody agreed, like, hey, this having a standardized container size is the right way to go. What was the size? There was a big issue with unions, and when everything was in break bulk, obviously that was very manpower intensive for loading and unloading, and so there were a lot of jobs that also were impacted. So there were all these other issues that delayed the acceptance or the implementation of the Connex box or the container, and so that's the piece I believe that everybody is really not considering, and when they implement these solutions, is that it takes time, right? And so with this project, we started development before I even got to Naval Postgraduate School in 2010. And again, I in my opinion, the model was 95% done by halfway through 2011. And the Navy just implemented the last fleet in October 2019. So, now it did roll out in the larger fleets around the 2014-15 timeframe. So as a taxpayer, I'm very happy about that. But yeah, worldwide, it just got implemented last year, right as I think the month right or a few weeks right before the annual conference in Seattle. So yeah, 9 years, and most of the math took about 18 months, and then the human piece and some slight changes in like the user interface and what platform it was on took the rest of the time. So just to kind of reinforce what this slide says, you're always on, you got the innovators, the early adopters, the majority, and the laggards. And this time frame, I think many of us can do analytics very quickly and create models and validate models very quickly. Implementing models is probably on a completely different time frame, right? Getting people to adopt them, trust them, use them for their intended use could take much longer. And just real quick, I just wanted to go over the Rasp example. So this model was a mixed integer program. Its main purpose in life was to minimize fuel use. For those of you who have done any studies on like hull designs on ships, or if anybody watches the America's Cup, the sailing race, your hull in water, water is not a kind substance, right? So the resistance of water goes up, not linearly, it goes up exponentially. So the faster you go through water, the more it pushes back, the more resistance you have. So basically what was going on is that the humans that were trying to schedule the ships could do a feasible solution. However, if anything changed in that solution, they would have to make up for their lack of being able to calculate, do all these calculations. They'd have to have the refueling ship go faster. And these ships are ginormous, and just a matter of a few miles per hour could burn a lot more fuel, right? So you just want them to go within their economic range, their cruising range. So the other piece of this is that these refueling ships also deliver commodities to the Navy ships, so food, ammunition, fuel, and repair parts. So this again, the humans were doing it day by day, but the Rasp model can actually go out for 90 days. And that was one of the additions we had to do for the Pacific fleet because the water space was so big. So you get a 90-day look of your optimal schedule, which is really nice also for planners. And as you can see right there, humans probably 3 to 6, depending on the day and how trained they were. Rasp basically did 100,000 to 200,000, although we only showed the top 10, which again was we had to figure out which optimal solutions, because if you only show one, that may not make sense for various reasons. So we would always choose to show the top 10, just in case there were some constraints where, you know, maybe 1 through 5 just didn't make sense. So then the user could select the 6th one. And this was kind of all the roles for this this project. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Navy, 5th Fleet is in the Persian Gulf, based out of Bahrain. So that was the first fleet. At the time, there was a lot of activity in that area. And there's a big difference when you have supporting ships inside the Persian Gulf, close to Iraq, and outside the Persian Gulf, and, you know, perhaps off the coast of Africa. So trying to schedule where these ships go, a Straits of Hormuz transit, which is how you get from the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean, is not trivial. So you want to minimize those transits if possible. The actual command that owns the ships is called the Military Sea Lift Command. And it's hilarious because they own the ships, and the way that the U.S. military works is that these ships get given to the COCOM, or combatant commander, to actually use. So even the book, the first thing I say is, you know, if somebody gave you a Ferrari and told you didn't have to pay for parts, you didn't have to pay for fuel, you didn't have to pay for insurance, you know, I think most of us are going to have a lot of fun driving that Ferrari really fast, right? By the way, you don't have to pay for speeding tickets too, right? That's even the best part. So, and that's really what happens, you know. So a lot of times there was no real incentive for the schedulers to actually even save money in the first place, right? If they needed the ships to go faster, they would just tell them to go faster. So, and then Naval Postgraduate School is actually the modeling agency for this. So that's how this network worked. So yeah, this was implementation 1.0. This one was the one that didn't go so well. We did a 1-week site visit. We left them a laptop with the model. We had a junior power user, and we actually did have a party. We came back to Monterey, California, went out for a beer, and then a month later, somebody had lost the laptop. The junior power user had transferred, and nobody knew what the heck Rasp was. So we knew that we had to do something different. So the 2.0 implementation, MSC actually funded a reservist, which he was just unbelievably helpful, and for 11-month orders. And so that was our eyes and ears at the command in Bahrain. We migrated the model from the laptop to the network, and that's what I was talking about. We made it fully integrated with Excel and a bunch of VBA. We had weekly teleconferences with these commands, and when we went to Singapore, we did the same thing. We got another reservist and had weekly teleconferences, and we held off on the party, right? We had small celebrations, but we did not have the big celebration that we had before. So, and yeah, this is kind of those action circles with the power user on site. That the reservists really helped, because the one thing that we again needed was somebody that the people on site trusted, right? And people very rarely trust people that like come in for a week and you know, give them training and tell them how good their model is and then leave, right? So this reservist, this person really became part of the command and helped them out and earned that trust, right? So that was very important. And yeah, this was the context of this project. And yeah, that's it. So the two books that, the book that we used for, you know, a lot of our chapter was Innovator's Way. And then this was the paper that my co-author Wilson Price actually did, that we implemented a lot of the, what that he had done that he had seen for OR solutions before Rasp. And we just kind of took Rasp and used it as a use case. That the one story I will share with you real quick that I always share is that we actually had a senior captain when I went back over to Bahrain, and this is maybe a year after we had implemented it, and we asked the senior captain who was in charge of this command, why don't you trust or use this model? And the captain basically said that it makes me feel better if I yell at my lieutenant. It doesn't make me feel any better if I yell at the computer. And we were like, wow, okay, that's interesting, right? So, and that's really what you're fighting against, right? There is nothing in the world that you could probably say to that captain, that commanding officer at that point, that's going to make them feel better about yelling at a computer, right? I guess we could have built some kind of function in that to the computer that said, I'm sorry every time it heard the captain yell at it. But I mean, that it's crazy stuff like that, the human aspect of this, that I think there is no class that I ever took, in my years at Naval Postgraduate School, or in the military, or anywhere, that kind of addresses how do you overcome that, right? So, yep, good stuff. So with that, I'll stop for any questions or comments.
That
Thanks.
is a great presentation. Thank you so much for that, Walt. And I really get the human factor piece of being able to yell at the lieutenant instead of the computer. And we wrestle with that challenge with machine learning and artificial intelligence today, right? Who's responsible if the model goes wrong? In your case, the model was right, but I still want to be able to yell at at somebody. In this case, what happens when it goes wrong? Yeah, great. So love to open it up to questions. Feel free. I'm going to go ahead and take the screen, but please,
sure.
if you would like to ask questions specific to Walt's presentation, feel free to either put it in chat or use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and I'll bring you off mute. Okay, looking at, don't see any questions yet or hand raises. So with that, what I'd like to do is introduce our panel. So thank you again so much for that, Walt. That was a great story. I actually do have a couple questions, but I'm going to save those for the very end, and make sure our panel has an opportunity to share their experiences as well. So next, I'd like to introduce that panel to you to continue the discussion and to see if you have any other questions. So you've met Walt, you've met Dr. Scala, you've met me. I'd like to also introduce you to two other people who will join in the discussion, share their experiences, and answer any questions you might have. So first, Shannon Dietrich is a Senior Systems Engineer and Deputy Program Manager at JDSAT. It's a certified service disabled veteran-owned small business in the DC area, specializing in ops research and data science. Shannon holds a bachelor's and master's in systems engineering from University of Virginia and an MBA from University of Denver. Also joining us from JDSAT is Dan Wozniak. Dan's a senior data analyst whose work focuses on modeling and simulation. He holds a bachelor's in anthropology and a master's in human paleobiology. That's actually a mouthful, Dan. He's a programmer fluent in R, Python, Java, and HTML, JavaScript, and no doubt has lots of experiences asking, why won't they use my model? So with that, I'd actually like to jump in to the panel, see if Dan, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, Sean, thanks. And also one other thing I just want to mention is that Shannon and I are also working on a formal mentorship program for JDSAT. And so far we've been sort of in a discovery phase and just recently had an employee survey. And one of the things that was interesting to find out is that there is a want from a lot of our analysts to be mentored on things like soft skills, communication skills, leadership skills, and others. And I think it just kind of dovetails nicely into the presentation we just had, is that, yes, there are now analysts recognizing that, I need to develop some of these things in order to be heard, either right by the client, by the boss, whoever it is.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dan. Thank you. Yeah, Shannon. Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, I agree very much with what Dan said. And I think not only are young analysts really seeking the development in the soft skills area and the organizational, kind of that organizational interaction component and that ability to influence change management. But what we also found is that it's so important for them to identify this is the area that I need help. So whereas when I started in the workplace more than 10 years ago, let's say, mentorship was really specific. Like you're going to get career advice and your career advice is going to progress your career. Well, now it's more like, the recommendations from the benchmarking research we've done is you need to really, it's better to identify what exact area do I need assistance in. And, if we taken any of the slides, like we could have probably taken any of the slides that we just saw and said, okay, well, what area would an analyst need mentorship in order to be able to be successful in getting these, communicating these concepts or being, actively, purposefully engaged in these concepts. So what Dan and I learned now is he said analysts are interested in developing those skills. And then also the most important thing is for them to articulate, this is specifically what I need to learn and work on and set goals for that growth.
That is great. Great feedback. I appreciate that. All right. Any other thoughts from our panel? And I'd love for you when you do come off mute, if you wouldn't mind popping on your video. We'd love to see it. And if you do have questions, please feel free to put it in chat or use the raise hand feature. As a matter of fact, we do have one question from Stephen. Does Informs have a clear delineation of the needed soft skills and what authorities to consult on these? Interesting. Any thoughts on that from the panel?
So I'm not sure they really address soft skills, say, in the analytics maturity model. And Walt or Sean can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I think the analytics maturity model is more on that descriptive, predictive, prescriptive model and the growth in your organization. But, soft skills is, I think, sometimes even more important than the model itself, because as Walt was mentioning, you could have the greatest model in the world, saves $10 million, but if nobody understands it and nobody buys into it in the organization, it's going to sit on the box. It's a black box to them. They don't understand it. And a lot of times we're brought in as consultants or analytics professionals and the reason we're brought in is because the current office doesn't know how to do it, right? And that's not a knock on the current office, right? We're seeing all kinds of mission-based organizations in the United States government and even in industry. I've had an industry experience as well where their job is something else and they're very, very good at it, but they're not analytics professionals. But now they're in need of analytics. So one example I worked for an electric utility company one summer when I was in graduate school, and we had all this knowledge of the warehouse employees. They knew where every product was. They knew how to do their job, but they had too much stuff, and we needed to reorganize, and we needed to do a facility layout. But the point is they used the model we created because I sat and listened to them, heard their pain points, heard what they liked, heard what they wanted to keep, and then designed a solution that was more optimal or continuously improved, that also doesn't ruin it for the people who are working there, right? You can't go from step one to optimality overnight. We think of it as industrial engineers. We have to take those continuous improvement steps. This even goes as basic into like Excel models, right? So Walt obviously had a sophisticated solution in his problem with a laptop and a person assigned. But even when we build Excel models and pass them off, I had an experience with a government client. We passed off an Excel model that had macros and buttons and all kinds of stuff in it. Client was super interested in the model. So they started playing with the cells. They look, oh, what if I change this number in this cell? And what if I change that here? What happens? Well, that's all well and great, but then they forgot to change it back to the original questions and the original structure. And then unfortunately, the model was no longer working, right? It was quote unquote broken, right? They had the wrong numbers in it. They did their analysis and then they briefed up their leadership chain with a model that had some fundamental issues in it, but again, no one's fault on their own. Everybody meant well, but these things happen. So what ended up happening is the leadership pointed at my team. Well, you passed off this model. So we really need to think about it as analysts is sometimes we need to step out. And I think that's what's great about OR too, is that we don't necessarily just sit at the computer all day. We can go out, especially decision scientists, go out and talk to people. And we have to think about that client and our end user. And what is their goal? How do they use it? And how do they consume math information, whether they're more analytically advanced or not? And if we kind of keep those things in our consideration and we build solutions that respect those differences and respect those guidelines, we can be way more successful in getting people to understand the model and buy into it.
Those are great points. And I do apologize. I think I've enabled everyone on the panel to be able to turn on their video. Please let me know if that is not the case, and I'll correct myself. So my apologies there. There you go. Thank you. Great point. And just before transition to the next question, talking about the organizational competencies of the analytic maturity model, Walt, if you wouldn't mind, I know you have a lot of familiarity with that. That'll be the next thing that we transition to here in just a few minutes. But on the soft skills piece, I have to give a plug for one of the ways that I really value in forms and mass is the opportunity for junior analysts to present their work in friendly audiences like this. So here's a webinar, about 30 people who are interested in the same aspects, sharing and collaborating with each other. And so here's a safe environment for junior analysts to get their feet wet and hands dirty in doing exactly that. I can't think of any better way to do kind of client-facing soft skills development than live, by getting not necessarily in the deep end of the pool, but wading further out from your comfort zone to do exactly that. But any other thoughts, Walt, on the analytic maturity model, the organizational competencies?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it does address like the leadership impact. It has 3 different themes: data, analytics processes, and organization. And organization, it really does consider the impact outside of the analytics provider, if you will. So that has, but again, it doesn't, it's, 12 factors, 4 factors for each theme. So there's not any way to really get into, is it soft skills that's really the issue with communicating analytics. So it does, but at an aggregate level. The other point I just want to make really quick is, in general, we don't do ourselves any favors in academics. So for instance, I'm a practicing advisor at NC State, and students do a 1 semester kind of capstone project. And so they basically work with a company, Merck, Lenovo, IBM, and we give them a scope problem that they have to basically deliver on in 13 weeks, right? Well, that's great. That's great experience. And we try, I really try to scope those to where they can actually learn something and deliver something. But, the Rasp took 9 years. That's almost 20% of my lifespan to fully implement. So that's real life. So I think, I think we really owe it to ourselves and to the junior folks. And, you said it best, Sean, that they need to hear these stories, right? Hey, you can go out and make a big impact with analytics, but, it's not going to be overnight, and set some expectations. Not every project is obviously going to take 9 years, but, we give them the tools to really do some quick hitting things. And, but yeah, the reality is that the time scales that because of academics, because a semester is a semester, or a program length is a program length, but that's not real life sometimes. So, but they need to hear that, right?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, I was going to try to pull up very quickly here. If you want to learn more about the Informs Analytic Maturity Model, I've got the wrong one. My apologies. So I'll get that. I'll send that link out in chat, or while I'm talking, if you don't mind doing that for me. I thought I nailed it, but I've got too much stuff on my screen. My apologies there. So I'd like to, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left before the end of the hour. And before we close out, I'd like to see Dan or Shannon, any additional thoughts there? I don't see any additional questions in chat, so I'd love to bring you back into the panel discussion if you'd like. Oh, I think I've got you on mute. No. Yep. All right, well, I apologize. Shannon, Dan, feel free to come off mute. And with that, any other questions for our panel today?
Yes. Stephen just asked one about CAP soft skills, the Certified Analytics Professional. This one, I'm just going to keep my answer really short to allow everybody else to answer. This one is a conundrum. If you look at the CAP guide, it has soft skills all over the place, right? And then you go to the test, and like, how do you test for soft skills? And so it's kind of like academia. I mean, it's even worse because you can't even have somebody do a short presentation, right? It's a computer program that you got to hit multiple choice questions. So it's definitely addressed in the CAP program, but yeah, it's not tested for to get awarded a CAP. I guess there is some certification that you have to have signed by somebody who has senior skills, and that's how they do it. Which I don't know of any better way to do it myself, but yeah, that's how CAP addresses it.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, is that there is a soft skills certification component to the application that has to come from that individual's immediate supervisor or a reference. But yes, and speaking of which, in addition to the handbook for military operations research, I would recommend, I don't know if I can.
Oh yeah, the analytics.
Is the analytics body of knowledge. So talking about the Informs CAP, that's lots of great discussions in there as well to continue the conversation. But have to, do the final plug. Let me go back to, this one here. Definitely encourage you to check out the Handbook of Military and Defense Ops Research. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention too, we have a whole section in the book. So there is like an application section to the book, a theoretical part, but there is a section on soft skills and client relations. So there's a couple other chapters in there. One that's coming to my mind right now is by Freeman Marvin on, he talks about a bunch of people sitting around a table, moving them into a turbo team kind of environment. How do you get that team culture to be built and to be executed in these projects, especially like I mentioned kind of earlier, people have different backgrounds, different skill sets, and bringing them all on the same table. So we may be interested in that chapter as well. But again, like Sean said, the analytics body of knowledge is a great resource too, especially if you are just getting into this problem space.
Great, thank you. Shannon, any final thoughts for you?
Yeah, I can't see if my video is working correctly.
You are on, yes.
Okay, great. This will probably resonate with a lot of folks, but I think one of the challenges too is when you have managers of analysts that are predominantly technical, it's also then hard to get that the focus and the mentorship on the soft skills. So I think I think the organizations have to really be looking at that balance of technical and soft skills, whether that's through your manager or whether that's through mentorship environment. So I think there's like that responsibility is both with the analyst level that they have to, advocate for these are the skills I need to grow and learn. But then there's also the organizational level of making sure that's like part of the planned development.
Great point. Great point. Well, I see that we are at time, and so I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I want to thank Walt for the presentation today. I want to thank our panelists for joining in the discussion, and I want to thank each of you for joining in to today's webinar. Definitely encourage you to connect with us. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, and our email addresses are there on the bottom of the slide as well. Please don't hesitate to reach out. If you enjoyed this webinar, let us know. If you have suggestions for other webinars, please let us know. We're always looking to extend invitations. If you'd like to present some work and share your experiences, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you again to everyone for joining today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.